All right, welcome. We're starting Module 2, so this is Lecture 1 in Module 2. We're going to talk a little bit about economic systems and specifically capitalism. But before we do that, obviously we need to define our terms and know what we're talking about. And an interesting thing to start this out with is to talk a little bit about, again, in regulation to social problems, a social problem that has existed in our society for over 40 years. In the 1980s, under then President Ronald Reagan, the United States government started deregulating quite a bit. In other words, stopped enforcing or taking away many of the rules that regulated our economy. I'll talk more about that in specific in a second. And it was also followed up by what was largely referred to as trickle-down economics, this idea that if we allow it so that the rich in society can become more wealthy with less regulation, that the money will go up and then trickle down, and everyone will benefit from that. So that process started in the 1980s. By the 1990s, the American public was being told that the economy was booming and that our society was doing fantastically and everything was great. And for the large part, we as a society bought into that idea that, okay, this process must be working out as planned. In the early 2000s, specifically in the years 2007 to 2009, America suffered a very large recession. And it was largely due to, again, many factors. Probably do an entire semester on this, but largely due to the deregulation of the housing industry and the ways that housing was financed in our society, and our economy came very close to collapsing. And since then, the median or the middle number, 50% make more, 50% make less, income for families not only dropped, obviously, surprisingly because of the, or I should say, not surprisingly, dropped sharply due to the recession, but has also continued to drop. Typically, when we think about economies and slow and steady growth, we think, okay, as the economy grows bigger, which ours does, that must mean that median family incomes must be getting higher as well. And the exact opposite we've seen. Median, or again, middle of the road family incomes have steadily dropped ever since the early 2000s. So this concept of, okay, how did this process of deregulation and then obviously the media portrayal of this as being good for our society, how is that playing out and how does it continue to play out? Well, we definitely know, and we'll talk about this when we talk about wealth in a future lecture, that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, to use an old phrase, and that this idea of trickle-down economics, sending money to the top for the purposes of it coming down, that the money in our society is going to the top and staying there. Okay? So I'm setting the stage for the discussions we'll be having. So let's talk a little bit about some of the terms that have got up behind me. Economics is a very important term sociologically. Basically, again, another social institution, one of the things that our society and all societies need in order to exist is a system of economics. And that's basically any society from hunter-gatherers all the way up you can describe their economic system. How that society produces and distributes goods and services, okay, is the definition of economics. When we think about economics, we often tend to simplify and say that there's basically only two types of economic systems, okay, and they're radically different than one another in their characteristics. We'll start with the one we're more familiar with, which is capitalism. Three characteristics that define capitalism is private ownership, and again, to use a very Marxist kind of term, private ownership of the means of production. But basically what that means is the ways that a economy produces goods and services are called the means of production, right? So, in an oversimplified way, it's how we make and distribute goods and services. And in capitalism, the concept is that the means of production are privately owned. I mean, individuals can own, okay? And here's an important distinction, which we'll talk about some more. For legal purposes, a corporation, which may be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if sometimes not even millions of people, is defined as an individual legally. Okay, so basically, if we go back to some of the old Marxists, when he started coming up with the idea of a factory, is that in capitalism, the factory that produces a product is privately owned. One person owns it, right? So I'll use an example. Like I said, I've used it in lots of classes. It's kind of a classic example. So I'm an owner of a factory and I produce boots, right? So it's my goal to produce the Flavin Boot Factory, right? And my goal is to make quality footwear. As I said it, right? So I own the factory. I own the parking lot. I own the land that it's on. I own the trucks that take my boots all over the place. I own the machinery that makes the boots. I buy the materials from someplace else, right? From somebody else's privately ownership of a leather producing manufacturer, and I buy boot laces, and I buy all the things I need to make my boots, and then I pay workers to come in, run the machinery, produce the boots, box them up, put them on trucks, drive them someplace. Okay, and where I'm taking them is to the market. Quite literally, it could be an actual market where I'm, let's say, setting up in a like a farmer's market, so I've got a stand and I pay people to run that, or literally I'm taking them to other places that will sell them for me, shoe stores, whatever else it is, right? And I calculate how much it cost me to make the boots, right? So let's say it cost me $20 between the leather and the soles and the amount I have to pay workers, and I'm still paying a mortgage on the factory itself or some of the machinery I use. But I calculate each pair of boots costs $20, right? Now, in the third thing, the pursuit of profit is when you sell something for more than it costs to make. I would say, well, in order to maximize my profits, it might cost me $20, but I'm going to sell them for $200, right? That'll give me a healthy profit margin, right? I'm going to produce them for $20. I'm going to make $180 off of every pair of boots that I buy. However, what I can charge is largely going to be determined by the market and competition in the market. So there's other people out there who are also making boots, right? If I show up at a marketplace or a shoe store trying to say, hey, I want to sell my boots for $200, the market may very well laugh at me and say, well, Mr. Smith over there sells boots that cost $40. So, if people have a choice, they're probably going to buy $40 boots as opposed to $200 boots. So I will have to say, I need to adjust my prices, right? So I may sell my boots for $40 as well, or $41, because I want that to squeeze out that extra bit of profit, hoping people think that extra dollar means more, quality, and they'll go for that. Or if I want to undercut that person, I'll sell mine for $39, hoping to get more people to buy my boots and save $1, right? So what I charge is largely going to be based on what we sometimes say the market can bear. So those are the three elements of capitalism, right? Private ownership, market competition, and what are we doing this for? The pursuit of profit. Different than that is the system called socialism. Okay? And in socialism, we see pretty much the exact opposite. Okay? In a socialist economy, the public owns the means of production. In other words, if you live in a socialist society, then boot factories are owned by the public, meaning they're owned by the state, but for all intents and purposes, the state is made up of everyone who lives in the society. So in a sense, everybody owns everything that's being made in that society and the means of production for doing so, right? So a factory is not owned by one person, it's owned literally by everybody in the society, okay? There's something called central planning, okay? Instead of market systems, the government, right, which is the organization that runs the state, decides things like how many boots will be produced, where they'll be distributed, and how much they'll cost. Okay, so the society might say, the factory might produce, let's say, 1,000 boots in a year, right? And the government will say, well, we're going to send 200 to this city and 200 to that 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 city. That's where they'll go. And based on what's going on, let's say the boots cost $20 to make, the society will say, well, the boots will then cost $20 to everybody in those cities, right? Because we're not pursuing profit. The idea is we're trying to get these products to the people who need them in our society. So city A needs boots and city B needs boots, so we'll send certain amounts to different places. People will get them for what they cost, okay? So and again, I'm oversimplifying here, I know that, right? But the basic characteristics are public ownership, central planning, and no pursuit of profit, okay? So we can clearly see these two economic systems are radically different than one another, right? And again, when we think about quote unquote capitalism in the US, we're conditioned to think that this system, capitalism, is superior to socialism. They both have advantages and disadvantages. We'll go into that a little bit more. But we've certainly, in our society, again, going back to that concept of hegemony, right? The shared ideas that are taken as granted by everybody, that socialism kind of quote unquote equals bad. We often associate socialism with totalitarianism, ruled by one very small group or one person, which in our society is the opposite of democracy. However, we have to recognize that those are political systems, not economic systems. So the idea of equating socialism with totalitarianism is incorrect. It's apples and oranges, to use an old phrase, right? Another thing we sometimes think about is capitalism, exists in a pure form. That there's, and America is a purely capitalistic society, which is, again, incorrect. There are many aspects of our society which are based on the socialist principles, right, of a type of economy. If we think about the things like, would we appreciate if our house was burning down and we called, 911 and said, my house is burning down, send the fire department, that the fire department would say, we need a major credit card before we'll come out, or worse, come out, put out the fire, and then say, here's your bill, right? You now owe us tens of thousands of dollars for putting out the fire in your house. We as Americans would say that's absolutely ridiculous, right? Think about the fire department, right? It is owned publicly, right? Whatever city you live in, chances are your municipality, the township, the borough, the city, whatever it is, owns the fire department. They own the trucks, right? Central planning, the government will decide where and when fire houses get built and how many fire trucks there will be and how many fire people to hire, right? With the idea that this is going to be a service that's given to the public at no profit. Well, what pays for it then? Clearly we say our taxes pay for that. So we pay taxes, and again, this is in a socialist society, largely where the money comes from to have all these things, is private individuals pay taxes to the state. The state then decides how to divide up those resources, right? So again, I'll use the example of the fire department, the police, public schools, we have all sorts of laws in our society which actually say that those things have to be, pointing toward socialism, have to be provided by the government to us. We regard these as rights. But technically what we sometimes as Americans need to realize is that these are socialist programs, right? Then you can get into things like Social Security, right, and other types of entitlements that we often talk about in our society, unemployment benefits, right? These are the things that are technically socialist programs that are incorporated into our society. So this concept of a purely capitalistic society, really the only type of purely capitalistic societies that exist are what we sometimes commonly refer to as the black market, right? So, and we definitely know that there's problems with those types of situations. So let's say there's a market that just sells anything without any kind of regulation whatsoever. Okay, we usually think of as illegal or black markets, right? The concept is I can go there and buy anything I want. I can buy weapons, I can buy drugs, I can buy medicines, right? And there's nobody to tell me what I can and can't buy and pursue, right? A pure capitalism, right? Well, what happens, let's say you're suffering from a horrible disease and you want to receive some type of medication for that. Well, you could go to the black market, somebody can sell you a medication that they guarantee you will work, and you can take it home and it can either not work or worse, make you more sick, and make your condition worse. Where do you go for that, right? Can you complain? Can you call the Better Business Bureau? Can you file a lawsuit? No, because that's a purely capitalistic system. There is no form of regulation on it whatsoever. We definitely know that in our society, as consumers, we enjoy a certain amount of protection based on the idea that our capitalist system is regulated, right? There are rules when you buy a new car. Anybody can slap together, four wheels and an engine and sell it to you probably for a couple $100. But we know we spend lots of money on cars that are designed to be safe, right? And that we probably wouldn't want to drive on the roads with a lot of cars that are just four wheels strapped to a frame, without anything like seat belts, airbags, headlights, brake lights, anything like that. So we know that capitalism in our society is not, in a sense, pure capitalism. It is highly regulated. And we definitely know that there are many aspects of our society which have a socialist bent to them. However, we still regard ourselves largely as a very, very, very capitalist society. Are there societies around the world, nations, that openly accept and blend these two systems? Yes. They largely describe themselves as, spelling wrong, democratic socialist societies. This idea of many countries around the world have recognized that there are advantages to capitalism and advantages to socialism, and they have literally and openly combined the two. Again, not to single out any particular countries or try to make it sound as if I'm advocating some nations over others or an area of the world. But if we think a lot of European, especially Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, we often think of these countries as being, quote unquote, openly democrat socialist economies. Okay, this idea of we're going to take elements of capitalism, elements of socialism, and combine them. And the idea basically is that in these societies, usually the heavy or what we sometimes call critical industries in a society are socialist. In other words, owned by the state. So things like power production, transportation, and even a lot of times the media, right, are state owned. Right? They're owned by the state, controlled by the state, regulated by the state, right? And everybody can access them for free. So healthcare, we've heard this issue going on in our society for quite some time, is often publicly owned, right, or controlled by the state. And then what's sometimes called small businesses, right, and service businesses are often then operated much on capitalist society, right? This idea of restaurants, small businesses, service industries. These are things that individuals can own and operate within the society according to things like competition and pursuit of profit, right? And these societies combine both of these elements. We definitely know, however, we're going to combine politics to this, right? And we often, sometimes because we do, and we think about political parties, there are many political parties that advocate all along this spectrum, right? So in many countries, you will see openly socialist political parties, communist parties, even to a large degree. I'll show you a video, or I'll make available a video later on that discusses some of those issues. But you'll definitely see where many societies, so that's workers' parties, labor parties, those kind of things, which definitely skew down here. In the United States, we definitely know, again, this is a bone of contention among many people, that there are two main political parties. So we could say the Republican Party, right, and the Democratic Party. are both, however, we can say one skews more to the left and one skews more to the right. But clearly, if we put them on the spectrum, we recognize that both of these political parties are very pro-capitalist, right? And that any political party in our society, which would skew more down here, communist, worker, the Green Party is sometimes associated with this, labor parties, are very much in our society downplayed, if not sometimes outright. We're outrightly hostile to them. We've had very little tolerance in our society for what we sometimes refer to, and that's why I've drawn it this way, left-leaning political systems that would advocate this, economic system. So this concept, and here's another important concept, the idea of social construction, something that we make up, something that we define. Again, it's related to the term hegemony, right? How do we define something as freedom? We often describe ourselves as being a free and democratic society. Well, an argument, if we just look at this, can be made that if we have two parties, largely, that we're restricted to making a choice between every election cycle, that only represent one end of this economic scale, then are we truly free? Do we have the ability to vote for, let's say, a socialist workers' party or a communist party or a labor party, right? These things that would be much more skewed toward this end of the economic scale. So again, largely to a large degree, when we think about this concept of freedom, we have to invite the idea that it's open to its interpretation as a social construction. We decide what the definition of freedom is.